Hi, I'm Brad Robinson with Healing Broken Trust, and we are continuing our discussion on the 7 stages of healing infidelity. There are 7 distinct stages that a couple has to go through if they are going to heal from an affair. That first stage is turning our negative cycle into a positive cycle. Generally speaking, the average person who has broken trust would say that their relationship was in a negative cycle prior to them acting out with an affair. So we want to turn those negative cycles into a positive cycle, which is what we're going to talk about today. But just as a quick recap, there's the stage of discovery, which we're going to talk about. There is trauma that discovery brings. There's ambiguity, meaning do I want to be here, do I not want to be here, that discovery of an affair brings. And then there is forgiveness. That's a stage that couples have to work through. And then there is meaning. What do I mean to you? How do I know you won't do this again? What does this affair mean for us? And then finally, post-traumatic growth. That's where greater good has come out of this situation. And we look back on it, not that we're grateful that we went through it, but there's been a lot of good that's come out of this, and we're better off as a result. And so we got to work through those different stages if we want to get to that post-traumatic growth stage. So that first stage that we're working on is turning those negative cycles into a positive cycle. So what is a negative cycle? A negative cycle is basically a rut that we get into with our communication where it becomes hard to communicate. Nothing seems to really go well. We're not really connecting. And anything we try to do to improve our relationship usually ends up just backfiring on us. There are 3 different types of negative cycles, and each are prone to infidelity. The first type is pursuer-distancer. Then there's the avoid-avoid negative cycle. Then there's the burnout pursuer with a withdrawer who then becomes a pursuer. So a re-engaged withdrawer. So those are our 3 types. So the first type, the pursuer-distancer, is a common type, but it's not necessarily always the most common type with infidelity. But it does happen. Infidelity does happen in these relationships. And the person who's most likely to have an affair in this kind of scenario is the avoider. And the avoider is somebody, they're the distancer, but they're somebody who usually bottles up their emotions. They don't do what's called proximity seeking, meaning if they're having a hard time, if they're struggling, they don't ask for emotional support. They try to deal with everything on their own. And they're very independent. They tend to compartmentalize their feelings and emotions. And they're in a relationship, their spouse, the pursuer. And the pursuer is a person who generally fears abandonment, maybe has some injuries from their relationship, maybe has been hurt prior or abandoned prior, so they fear abandonment. And what they'll do, because they fear abandonment, is they will want to be really close to their spouse, but sometimes they go about it in a way that can be controlling, or in a way that can kind of suffocate their spouse. And as the pursuer tries to get their needs met, if they don't feel like they're getting through, they may escalate to being more critical, blaming, demanding. And then the avoider, they continue to just avoid and distance. They continue just to shut down and compartmentalize. They don't really speak up for themselves. And so the pursuer has no idea what's going on inside of the avoider. They don't share. The avoider, the distancer, wants to avoid conflict. They want to distance themselves from conflict. The distancer's greatest need is for peace and harmony in their relationship, and they will avoid connection and talking about difficult things and difficult communication to keep peace and harmony in their relationship and to avoid conflict. The pursuer, though, will sacrifice sometimes peace and harmony to maintain connection, because they know that sometimes you have to talk about things to get through to their spouse, to have an intimate relationship. And so they can have opposing needs. So again, the pursuer, their biggest need is for connection, and they will sometimes engage in conflict and have conflict and vocalize things that are hard to discuss because they want connection. And so they'll sacrifice peace and harmony for connection. The distancer, that avoider, will avoid any sort of conflict. In their mind, they're maintaining peace and harmony. So that's their greatest need, is to have that. And so you can see there's opposing needs there. This is something we go much deeper into at our couples workshops, the pursuer-distancer dynamic, and how to work through some of this. We talk about those negative cycles. The second type of negative cycle, though, is the avoid-avoid negative cycle. This is where both partners are primarily avoiders. One partner may still have pursuer tendencies because they want connection more than their spouse. They may have been hurt by the other spouse, but they generally avoid anything that's not surface level. They generally avoid anything that will create conflict, and so they just bury what they're feeling. And when people bury what they're feeling, they end up developing resentment. They end up developing bitter feelings, because sometimes those things have to be worked out. If we're not vocal on how we feel, what can happen is things on our end don't get repaired. And so we can end up being very unhappy in a relationship if we're not talking about it. And what we want is more of a controlled burn that prevents forest fires, where we're talking about things on a smaller level, on a smaller scale, before it becomes a major catastrophe, a major issue. And avoiders, whether the pursuer-distancer, that distancer, or the avoid-avoid, that person who distances or avoids, they're not doing what's called proximity seeking, and as a result, things on their end don't get repaired, and they may be unhappy in their relationship, and that's part of what may contribute to them acting out with an affair. But their spouse, who's a pursuer, or their spouse that they're married to, may think, we're great, there's no issues, you're not complaining about anything, I think we're doing good. I don't know that things are as bad as you feel they are because you haven't told me. And so when an affair gets discovered, it oftentimes is very earth-shattering and it's always traumatizing, but there's a deep level of deception, and part of that deception is you weren't telling me all along that you were unhappy, that things were not going well. So that ties us in, that leads us into the third type of negative cycle, which is a burnout pursuer with a re-engaged withdrawer or re-engaged distancer. And what I mean by that is the pursuer who has been knocking on the door wanting connection, is saying, open up, let me in, I want to connect to you. They finally just get burned out. They finally say, you know what, you haven't been here, you haven't been supporting me, I haven't felt supported by you, I haven't felt like you've cherished me, I haven't felt like you've wanted me. And so they're hurt and they're dealing with hurts, but they've been dealing with it alone and they haven't been healing. And so the pursuer just starts to become a distancer, where they begin to not share feelings. They begin to minimize what they're feeling. They begin to compartmentalize. They begin to contribute less to the relationship. They begin to give less to the relationship. And what happens is they become vulnerable to an affair because they want to feel desired. They feel very alone. Maybe sometimes they're very angry. They don't feel like they're enough. And so they want to feel wanted and attractive. And so when they get burnt out, sometimes that's when that distancer starts to wake up and say, oh my gosh, there's a lot of distance here. Or, oh my gosh, you've left me. Or, oh my gosh, you've abandoned me. You've had your own affair. And they will become a pursuer, trying to save the marriage and work on the marriage. At the very least, close the gap of distance that's there. So those are three negative cycles that are really common before infidelity, that also contribute to infidelity. And they're all things that couples can work through, and that we do that for people at our workshops. So if you're interested in coming to one of our workshops, visit us online at healingbrokentrust.com. We'd love to meet you and work with you. See you next time.